Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for being with us at the Public Safety Committee meeting today. We're going to be discussing a few topics for the operating budget and the FY 21-26 CIP amendments. There are a few changes to the agenda, and we're going to go with the first topic was going to be the Office of Emergency Management and Homeland Security, and then we're going to take collective bargaining agreements with the MCVFRA, the volunteer firefighters. And then we're going to go to the Montgomery MCFRS, the Montgomery County Fire and Rescue Services. And then we are going to bring up, on our agenda, it talks about the operating budget consent items. We're going to bring up the Sheriff's Department as suggested by Ms. Farag in her packet, that we take that up not just as a consent item, but as an item that we actually discuss, and then we'll go back through the regular consent items as well. And unless my colleagues have anything to add, we're going to ask Ms. Farag to get us started, please. Colleagues, are we good?
Sounds great. Thank you.
Thank you. And with that, Ms. Farag, and we're glad to have everybody else here with us. Dr. Stoddard, I had a feeling you might be here as well. Call me way out there. And with that, Susan Farag, if you could please help us.
Hi, Mr. Katz. I'm just going to give it to Craig Howard because he's got emergency management item that you're taking first.
Okay.
Right. Good morning, good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Yeah, we can tell what kind of day you're having, Mr.
I know. So it's one of those days. So first up is the Office of Emergency Management and Homeland Security FY22 operating budget. And I'll just do a quick run through. The OEMHS budget is a increase of about 14.2% in FY22 from FY21. And the reason for that is the addition of 2 FTEs, which I'll talk about in a minute. Council staff is recommending the budget as approved by the executive, but we are recommending adding some operating budget resolution related to the nonprofit security grants. So I'll just go through real quick the 3 big changes in the budget. The first is the addition of a hydrologist position, and the executive recommends adding $109,000 and 1.0 FTE for this hydrology expert to assist with planning for future storms. The executive recommended this position in FY21, but the council was unable to fund it as part of the continuity of services budget. And so OEMHS and the executive are recommending this position for inclusion, in the budget in FY22. And during Q&A, if you want to have more questions about the specific duties of that position, Dr. Stoddard and others can provide that information. The second position is the addition of a planning division support specialist position, and this would add about $99,000 and 1 FTE to the FY22 budget. And this position would focus on a lot of the different emergency management planning initiatives that the department does, many of which are grant funded. And so the amount of time that is allowed to be spent on those activities is limited by the grant requirements. And so this would be a general fund position, which would allow for more flexibility for a lot of different initiatives that are listed out in the packet. And again, staff is here to provide more details on that if the committee is interested. And then the last piece is the executive recommends restoration of the nonprofit security grants. And I do want to make one correction to what's in the packet. I had listed $800,000 as the amount for this program. It's actually $700,000. The budget book listed $800,000, but it rolled up different program elements into the same line item. But so the actual total is $700,000, which is the same as the council approved last year in FY21. So the council did approve this in FY21, and as was discussed during the FY21 savings plan, because of COVID-19, these dollars weren't spent because religious events were not, in-person religious events were not taking place. At that time, the committee recommended and the full council agreed that this should become these dollars should roll over if they weren't spent into the next fiscal year. So to accomplish this, the executive shows this change as both a reduction and a restoration back to the budget in FY22. And then to address this issue going forward, staff recommends that the council add language to the FY22 budget resolution stating that any unspent funds for this program would automatically roll over into the next fiscal year. So essentially this turns this into a non-lapsing fund, so we don't have to do this, take it out and put it back in exercise every year. And the grants can be spent over a multi-year period, depending on what the demand is for the specific need. And with that, I will turn it back over to you, Chair Katz.
Thank you very much. Dr. Stoddard, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to, I think we all realize what the last year has been for all of us. Emergency management has been particularly impacted by the last year. Obviously been very busy with our COVID-19 response and recovery. And we fully expect that the response and ultimately the recovery will be very involved in next fiscal year. The end of the virus is not the end of the pandemic response and recovery. And I would also note, as we saw on January 6th with the insurrection, domestic extremism is on the rise. It's a threat that we have dealt with for a while and will continue to deal with. Climate change is still here and one of the preeminent threats of our time. And we have a lot of work to do in that space. And so I fully expect that the next year is going to be an incredibly busy one for the Office of Emergency Management, Homeland Security. And we appreciate the council considering the budget request that the executive has made and the increases that have been suggested, because we are going to need a lot of help addressing both climate change while also learning, doing after action reviews and learning lessons from what COVID-19 has taught us while we simultaneously recover from it. So that's all I wanted to give as an introduction. I appreciate you all hearing us out.
Well, let me say very, very publicly and very upfront that we sincerely appreciate all of your efforts and everyone when your staff and everyone else involved. I was going to say you've done a very difficult job, and times will say, and you made it look easy. This was not something even you could make look easy. This was, I always jokingly said 24/7 is not enough for you all. It's 25/8. You're seeing that you're never-ending issues, and you're right. As much as we would love, and I enjoy seeing you, don't get me wrong here, but as much as we would love not to see you as much, I have a feeling that it's not just going to be turned off. So I'm supportive of the staff suggestions, county executive suggestions, and staff suggestions, and I'll turn it over to my colleagues if they have anything as well. Council President.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Stoddard, I would echo everything the chairman said. I mean, I think your efforts and the efforts of your staff this year have been nothing short of heroic, and you've saved a tremendous amount of lives and really helped lead with HHS our efforts through through this pandemic where we've performed much better than so many of our surrounding and comparable jurisdictions. So I'm very supportive of the budget. One question I had about the nonprofit security grants. That's something I've always been supportive of. I don't remember, Mr. Chairman, whether they started. I remember when they started. I don't remember which tragedy that followed, whether it was South Carolina or the Tree of Life in Pittsburgh or something else. But I'm wondering if we do ever regular threat assessments of the threats in the county, and if our police or anybody else are involved in how is that budget set, and does this reflect growth in the number of threats and chatter to on our houses of worship in Montgomery County like we had a while ago? I haven't heard a briefing on this for a while, so I'm just curious about how we get to that number and if it's rising, as you mentioned, and low domestic terrorism threats have been rising, or if it's dropped off at all.
Yeah, so the last year has been very interesting. Will be difficult to assess because we have seen acts of hate and violence, particularly targeted not just against religious institutions, but of particular demographics like our Asian American community. Yeah. And so, but obviously many of those activities have been either restricted, closed, or modified in some way. So comparing apples to apples with previous years is very difficult. And so I don't know that we know exactly what the environment after COVID will look like for these grants, but we just know that when we previously did this grant, I think 2 years ago, it was a $300,000 budget, and we got well over $800,000 in requests for support. And so I think the number was largely selected based on the fact that we were trying to scale to the need in the community more with this particular ask of $700,000 last year and carried over for this year. And so we were trying to right size the effort. This program has had a couple different iterations. There was a variant that was done 3 or 4 years ago that was actually offered by the Department of General Services because they were capital-based expenses like cameras and more secure doors and things like that. When it transitioned to more programmatic, so people could do exercises, hire security guards, those kinds of things, it transitioned to the Office of Emergency Management. And we'd only done 1 year of that, and that's the year that we got that $800,000 ask. The police do still routinely conduct security assessments of houses of worship and other nonprofit institutions across the county. That's typically handled at the district level through the community liaison officers, essentially. It's really difficult to give you a firm answer on are we seeing an increase or not, because we're seeing a shift because of COVID behaviors that I would hate to postulate whether we certainly saw an increase prior to the pandemic during the previous federal administration, and you're well aware of that. I just don't know that we know what to expect after COVID. We see a rise in extremism, so I think it's probably not going to be good, but at the same time, we just don't know.
That's helpful. So the budget number, what I hear you saying is the budget number is really based on the request, largely unfulfilled request last time. And I'm of the school of thought of just, better safe than sorry, given what we are seeing. But it's not based on, which is a relief, an increase in threats right now to our houses of worship during the recovery and reopening. And it's not limited to houses of worship, right? And given the threats to our AAPI community and the violence, there are churches that be eligible, but also other nonprofits that be eligible as well, correct?
Correct. And so when this was originally designed, this is something the county attorney found to be very important. As government, given the separation of church and state, we can't specifically have programming that is restricted to houses of worship. And so the thought process is this, and this is the way the federal government does it. This is much more of a nonprofit security grant where houses of worship can qualify for it, but also, as you noted, racial and ethnic or other organizations that aren't specifically tied to conduct of worship, but other activities that do nonprofit type work would be eligible for this grant. Yes.
Okay. Thanks. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Council Vice President.
Thanks. So I think all of us have been in God knows how many meetings with Dr. Stoddard this last year. Just let me just say a few things. I've been so impressed with your leadership. The way that you've been able to coordinate multiple county agencies, multiple bureaucracies, and that's just within Montgomery County. That doesn't include the state and our federal partners. And you and your team, Dr. Stoddard, just do an absolutely amazing job of connecting dots and doing it in a way that's professional, that's responsive, and that is very impressive. So I had the opportunity to work side by side with you for several years and have continued to be impressed now that I'm on this side of the aisle. So 1000% concur with the recommendations of the county executive to enhance wherever we can your operation. And like you and like all of us, am very anxious and have had some sleepless nights thinking about what lies ahead because we've correctly focused so much of our time and energy and emotion, frankly, on addressing all the issues related to the pandemic. But we've got a 400% increase in gun sales, off the charts behavioral health and mental health issues, and phone calls coming into our crisis center, rises in hate crimes that date back to the previous administration, and climate change challenges that are hard to wrap your arms around. So we need to remain diligent and prepared in the in the terrible circumstance should something happen. And I have spoken to you a couple times. I'm going to be proposing some joint committee sessions in the near future between HHS and public safety to see what, if anything, we can do beyond what we're already doing to prepare for the worst, because we have to have our eyes wide open in so many different areas. So just thank you again for your steadfast leadership through all of this. And you're a humble guy, so I'm sure that you will deflect everything that I and my colleagues have just said. But just know, sir, that we're all proud to have you as a public official here in Montgomery County and your team as well.
Mr. President.
You know, I think this is going to be without objection. Just call me way out there, Earl. But am I reading these tea leaves right, colleagues? This is without objection.
You know, your
Thank you
committee.
very much. Mr. Howard, do you need anything other than those words?
Nope, that's all good.
Very good. Thank you very much. And thank you, Dr. Stoddard, and your entire team.
Thanks,
With
Earl.
that, we're going to turn to Mr. Drummer. So it's item number 3, which, because it's government, it really becomes item number 2. But collective bargaining agreements with Montgomery County Volunteer Fire and Rescue. Mr. Drummer, if you could lead us through that as well.
Good afternoon. As you all know, the executive has an obligation to bargain with the MCVFRA, who is the representative for the local fire departments, and that's pursuant to a county law. And they've got a collective bargaining agreement. This system is similar to the collective bargaining for county employees, although not identical. It's a different statute. But for purposes of today, it's pretty similar. There are 5 items in the bargaining agreement that require either an appropriation of funds or a change in law that are before you today. Those are the only provisions that the council needs to act on. As the committee knows, last year, the council rejected the increases in the agreement for the MCVFRA, and as well as all the increases for all the county employee unions in the same services budget at the beginning of the pandemic last May. The executive entered into an agreement with the MCVFRA. I'm going to start calling them just the volunteers. I think it's
There you go.
easier for me, if you don't mind. That's what I mean. They entered into an agreement with the volunteers that if certain circumstances occurred, including general wage adjustments for the career firefighters, that he would submit a supplemental appropriation to fund the increases that were rejected for FY21. When we wrote the packet, he had not yet done that. That came through, I believe, yesterday. That's FY21 money, so it's not before you today, and that'll be taken up separately. It includes some other things besides the FY21 collective bargaining agreement increases. But for your information, what the executive has done in this budget is he's taken the increases that would have happened in FY21 and then added the increases that were negotiated for FY22. So for instance, in the nominal fee, these are the easy numbers for me to remember, in tier 2, for tier 2 volunteers, it's based on the amount of runs you do. The FY20 was $700. The FY21 was $800, but that never happened. FY22 is $900. What the executive has in the budget and in the agreement before you is in fact funding going forward for the $900. So let me talk about the the 5 items. So before I do that, I have made this point for at least 7 years. I believe it's been 7 years now. Just to point out that the collective bargaining process began long before the council enacted the Emergency Medical Services Transport Insurance Reimbursement Program, or the ambulance fee. When the council enacted the ambulance fee in 2013, they agreed to provide the volunteers, the LFRDs, with 15%. This year, I believe that comes out to $2.8 million. That's $2.8 million that they get outside of the collective bargaining process. They also get a grant, the state Senator Amos grant funds. And although we don't know exactly what that is, funding is, last year was a little over 2 million. So that's 4.8 million that they're getting outside of collective bargaining, as well as the county paying for station operations, fuel, utilities, vehicle maintenance, and basic personal gear and equipment needs for the volunteers. Just a point. I've pointed it out for the last 7 years that the bargaining agreement should take that into consideration. It has not, and the council has approved the agreements for the last 7 years, with the exception of last year during the pandemic, without regard for that. Let me just go through the 5 items that are in front of you. First is the association operating funds. And that's a total transfer of $281,178 to the volunteers, to the association, to serve as the authorized representative of the LFRDs. The increase from the current amount is $26,141. The second one is training, where the agreement requires the county to provide $10,000 for training and $5,000 for pro board certification for FY22. That's the exact same amount that was provided last year. That's not an increase. The nominal fee, which is paid to individual volunteers for the amount of service they provide, there's 2 tiers. There's tier 1 and tier 2. This is something that jumps from FY20 to FY22, including the FY21 increase. So it goes from $455 per person to $525 for tier 1, which is a 15% jump, and from $700 to $900 for tier 2, which is a 28.6% jump. Then there's the total amount for the nominal fee is $784,050. The increase under the executive's recommendations is $119,935 over what was paid last year. Then there's the volunteer basic orientation course, and that's $21,000. That's not an increase. It's the same as last year. Finally, we have the length of service awards program, which is something that's set forth in the county code. And it's essentially a retirement plan of sorts for volunteers, and provides them with a retirement pension. Not enough to live on, but a retirement pension. The executive had agreed to increase, to submit legislation to provide a 2.5% increase for FY22 and a 3% increase in FY21. We don't have the legislation. It hasn't come over yet. I'm told it's drafted, but it's still floating around somewheres in the executive branch, and should be here soon. I don't believe that the LoSAP legislation is a little bit complicated. It's not as complicated as some of our defined benefit retirement plans, but it is complicated. I can't tell, and you can't tell from this agreement exactly what they were planning to do without seeing the legislation and getting the actuary's report and the fiscal impact. So similar to where we are with the career firefighters enhanced retirement pension, while this does not appear to be a lot of money, the fiscal impact we have is 60,000. I don't think it's ready for council action, and the council really shouldn't approve it now and wait for the legislation. If the legislation comes before the council makes final decisions, it can be taken up then, and if not, it can be taken up as a supplemental later on in the year. But it's not ready for prime time without the legislation. So that's what we have in front of you today. Those are the items.
Thank you very much. I did want to note that I spoke to Mr. Manalino today, and I think up to about 10 minutes ago, I got a text saying that the county executive side was going to be sending, let me see if I can find the text here. They're going to be sending the LoSAP, the length of service awards legislation, to the council on Monday. So that's, I mean, obviously we don't have it, but just to give an update that they are aware that we don't have it. So.
Mr. Katz, this is Rachel
Yes.
Silverman. This is Rachel Silverman from OMB, and I just wanted, I've got an invite to start. There we go. I just want to apologize for the oversight. It was an error on our part, and we are expediting that legislation as quickly as possible through our process, and we will have it to you no later than Monday. It's really the latest that we would have it over to you. But I did just want to be clear that there are no surprises in that legislation. It just specifies what is before you in the agreement, and we don't foresee any issues getting that to you soon.
Thank you. And if I could ask the IT people, if you could please turn on Eric Bernard's camera, and Buddy Sutton, and Chief Goldstein is here as well, and want to welcome all of them to be with us. Mr. Bernard or Chief Sutton, did you have anything else or Chief Goldstein, did you have anything else to add? Eric, you're on mute if you're trying to add something. Eric, did you want to add, or I can't tell whether you wanted to add something. There
Yep, I was just unmuting. Thank you. They gave us the screen. I appreciate your time. President Sutton is here, and we can go. We'd like to address some of the areas that Mr. Drummer addressed if you need. As he said, he's been making this argument for 7 years, and for the past 7 years, he's not attended any of the collective bargaining sessions where we met with the executive and his representations, and I promise you, we did address all of this. The two areas of funding that he described, President Katz, are unavailable to the MCVFRA. We bargain on behalf of over 1,500 active volunteers that serve daily, providing free fire rescue and EMS service. These are very small benefits to the actual members. And the EMST law did come after collective bargaining, but in that law, it very clearly states it may not supplant funding that we were receiving prior to EMST funding. So we're glad to go through the different areas. We ask you for your support for your volunteers. We work very closely with our sisters and brothers on the career side under the leadership of Chief Goldstein. Our volunteers really stepped up during the pandemic, staffing extra EMS units, extra fire equipment. We've had many members become ill from COVID, and this is a small way that the county says, thank you very much for your service.
And again, we thank each of you and everyone who is volunteering for literally saving lives. I always appreciate Mr. Drummer's suggestions and thoughts, and we want to hear them. And he always gives his good reasoning for those suggestions. However, in this one case, I disagree with Mr. Drummer. And I believe that we should be, and if President Sutton has anything to add, I can't see you on the Zoom, so, or if Chief Goldstein has anything to add. I'm in agreement with the all five, candidly, but we can't vote on the LoSAP until we get the legislation. So with that, my suggestion is that we vote for 1 through 4 with the note that we're waiting, and hopefully it'll get here by Monday for the legislation. President Sutton or Chief Goldstein, did you have anything else to add on this?
Not from my seat, Mr. Katz. Thank you.
Thank you. Buddy, are you there?
Buddy is there. I'm not sure why you're not seeing him.
Okay.
He was there before.
Yeah, can you see him, Eric?
I can see him on my iPad that's watching the YouTube feed. I don't see him here, but we have three other screens.
Is he jumping up and down and he would like to say something? Can you let us know, please?
Actually, so I just lost him on the other feed.
Okay, all right. Well,
Mr. President, I would suggest that the numbers don't change as Ms. Silberman suggested. The law only will modify, since LoSAP is written into the law and the actual dollar amounts there, the legislation will simply change those dollar amounts to reflect the 3% increase for all members and an additional 2.5% for those that are active riding. Those will be the only changes. So since you're required to either vote a straw vote up or down before May 1 on these items, the dollar amounts will not change. So I suggest you can support the intent.
I agree with what you're saying. I do believe we have to have a note that says that we need to have, we're supportive, in my opinion. We're going to hear from the other committee members, but we do need a note that says we're supportive, but we need the legislation to be able to go forward on that part. But I don't think it should be lost. We went through this on Tuesday as well for other items. Council President or Vice President, did you have anything to add, please?
Sure, Mr. Chairman. I would just, I'm where you are. Bob mentioned that the volunteers get state support. I'm very glad they get state support. We pay a lot of state taxes, and we don't get nearly enough back from Annapolis, in my opinion, for a lot of things that are clearly state obligations, like education and healthcare and childcare. In this case, I'm glad the volunteer firefighters get some state support. Bob, you mentioned the Amos grants. The Amos grants are only for capital expenses. This is an operating budget hearing. Amos grants can't be used for compensation or anything like training or meals. I just checked a law to verify my memory of this. I agree with the chair. To me, we owe a debt of gratitude to our volunteers. We don't have enough firefighters, professional firefighters, to begin with, and we spend too much on overtime. Imagine if we had fewer volunteers. So I think this budget's a very prudent investment. I'm glad we have some people that are willing to put their lives on the line as volunteers of all things. And, I prefer to thank them for their service and vote for the budget.
Thank you. Vice President Albornoz.
I agree with the approach and the comments. I'll only add too, and this is just generally across the board among our first responders, we're having a hard time with recruitment in all aspects. And so I think that anything that we can do that provides additional layers of support, but also incentivizes us being able to attract more folks into this critically important field, I think is something that we should be supportive of. So I agree with your approach, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. And I did want to point out that Councilmember Friedson did send at least one memo, maybe two, to remind us that we should be fulfilling the Bethesda Chevy Chase Rescue Squad's FY22 budget request, and that is included in this. So that would be taken care of as well. Unless there's any further comment, this will be without objection for everything, as I say, except for we're going to approve number 5 as well on the list, but we need to have the legislation, which we understand is coming over hopefully by Monday. Is that okay to do it that way, Mr. Drummer?
Well, you're technically not approving it, but you're waiting for the legislation. but the legislation, I'm sure, will come over. This is scheduled to go in front of the full council on Tuesday.
Okay,
I mean, this is better than what we went through with the pension for the IAFF, because that's a legislation that isn't done and may come over sometime in the next year. This is a little different situation. There is an agreement. There apparently is legislation. It simply hasn't shown up here. I assume it will by Monday, and the committee can, this is scheduled to go to the council on the 4th, next Tuesday, for action on the full council. You could, it doesn't sound like you need to have it back. It sounds like I know
certainly
what
don't want to
you're,
have it back. No.
I think I know what you're going to do and what the committee recommendation is. So I think we can just go forward on Tuesday.
Yeah.
And thank you. And I saw a thumbs up from Council President, Council Vice President. Your thumb was up too. I missed that one. Okay, I now see a thumb up there. Yes, Council President.
I just want to ask, so we don't repeat the debacle of Tuesday. Chief, do you know if you'll be there or somebody else from the executive branch will be there to answer questions from council members, since we didn't really have any senior folks from the executive branch when we had all the collective bargaining agreements before us last Tuesday?
It can be available on Tuesday, but in conjunction with OLR and OMB. Absolutely.
Right. Okay. That is great. Thanks so much.
Thank you. So without objection, this is approved. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And next, we're going to go to number 2 on the list, which is the Montgomery County Fire and Rescue Services, also known as MCFRS. And with that, unless my colleagues have anything to add, we're going to ask Ms. Farag to lead us through, please.
Good afternoon, everybody. As you pointed out, this is the FY22 operating budget, but it also includes some CIP amendments for fire and rescue. We'll start off with the operating budget first. For FY22, this is about a 3.5% increase from last year's approved budget. There are absolutely no service cuts proposed this year, unlike years past where certain pieces of apparatus were recommended for abolishment. There are enhanced services in this budget, including 10 new paramedic training positions that will help address some understaffing. There's also 1 new paramedic chase car and 1 new day work ambulance that'll help enhance EMS service delivery. I will also briefly touch on the fire department's audit, which the committee discussed last year in conjunction with the police audit and the community engagement piece that had come over as a supplemental appropriation last fall, I believe, last September. The first thing I wanted to talk about is just to set the context here for addressing structural deficiencies, and it's a conversation that the committee has had many, many times in years past. There is an ongoing structural overtime deficit. A lot of this stems from not having sufficient staffing, as was pointed out in the 2018 County Stat Net Annual Work Hour Update, which had determined at that time that the department needed approximately 180 career firefighter positions to achieve minimum staffing requirements without the use of overtime. And again, in a 24/7 public safety operation, you don't want zero overtime. There will always be an efficient use of some overtime, but right now it's too much and it's also not appropriately budgeted. And I've got prior year expenditures listed for you on page 3. I did want to point out I've got a typo in FY19, and that actual overtime amount was more about 25.89 million, which I will correct moving forward when you go to the full council work session. For this year, for FY21, overtime is a little bit weird because of COVID. At first, it really shut down overtime because nobody could go anywhere, so nobody was taking leave. But in the same time, you also had people who couldn't be doing their frontline service because of health problems and other issues like that. And so there was backfill overtime necessary to fill those positions as well. So as of March 27th, actual overtime expenditures are about 17 million and 18.3 million were budgeted for FY21. So it's getting close, but it's not going to be the same type of cost overrun as in years past. For this year, budget overtime's been bumped up a little bit to 18.7 million. Again, I don't believe that this is going to necessarily accurately reflect how much overtime they will need, but I do want to point out that the county executive and the council have taken some steps over the past few years to help try to address this structural deficit. And one of those was the county executives adding 20 firefighter positions in the FY20 budget to help address that 180 firefighter gap. And the council approved that at the time. And in the same year, the executive had added $2.184 million to the overtime budget to reflect the impact of several years' worth of general wage adjustments. And again, the council approved that measure. Last year in FY21, the executive had recommended adding 20 new paramedic training positions. But since you were faced with an estimated $600 million tax revenue shortfall prompted by COVID, the council didn't approve any additional expenditures over top of its continuity of services budget. And therefore, these 20 paramedic positions were not approved last year. So 10 of them are returning this year for a cost of about $763,000. These positions help address the backfill overtime necessary for when firefighters are actually attending paramedic training. And it's my understanding those classes typically range from about 15 to 30 to 35 firefighters each. And OMB has advised that 20 paramedic training positions is still the appropriate number, even though 10 have been recommended, and that OMB is going to continue to reevaluate the need for training positions as it develops the FY23 budget. Adding these positions this year would help further address the original 180 firefighter staffing shortage. Along with the 20 firefighters added in FY20, that reduces the shortage to approximately 150 firefighters. Another step that this budget takes is civilianizing a facility maintenance position for savings of about $190,000. That's unlapsing a civilian program manager 1 to help provide facility maintenance management and coordination. And it allows career firefighters to go back to the field. And it's my understanding that includes a captain and a lieutenant. The facility section does include a facilities and equipment maintenance coordinator, but there is still an operational gap there. The department's been receiving, multiple service tickets per day. The first question is whether or not Department of General Services can handle this. They can't. They only handle very limited maintenance issues in fire and rescue stations, basically. The vast majority of these have to be addressed by fire and rescue itself. As I mentioned earlier, and I just wanted to point this out for committee consideration after the audit results come back for the fire department, general wage adjustment issues. When the salaries increase due to GWAs, overtime costs are going to increase as well. And in the past, the county executive has included the impact of GWAs in overtime budgets, but it hasn't been a standard practice every year. So, for example, looking at this year's budget, the GWA for FY20 and the GWA for FY21 have not been included in FY22 overtime budget calculations. And that would be approximately $715,000 from that cost element alone. So it kind of puts fire and rescue kind of behind the 8 ball to begin with, right? It's not going to necessarily be able to achieve that overtime budget as accurately as if that GWA were included. I'm not recommending including this funding at this point because I understand budget constraints, but I do recommend that the committee follows up on this issue once the audit comes back, and I'm not sure what the timeline is on that. I do have some additional information to discuss about the audit later. It'll probably be later than the fall, but I just wanted to put that on your radar. The budget also is adding EMS services. It has a new day work ambulance for about $640,000 and a new paramedic chase car for about $637,000. They have a daily cot count right now of about 42, which fluctuates between 30 basic life support ambulances and 11 advanced life support ambulances. And as you know, as the committee's been briefed multiple times, tying medical services to a cot for transport is not always the most efficient mode of service delivery, since not every patient needs transport for further treatment. To enhance flexibility, Fire and Rescue has been adding paramedics to all engines. And it also has 2 full-time paramedic chase cars, one's at Station 25 in Aspen Hill and one's at the Wheaton Rescue Squad. They also have 2 part-time paramedic chase cars that operate, one's at BCCRS and also at Rockville Station number 3. The costs associated with both of these include both operating expenses and overtime. There are not any new positions added to the budget. And of course, this raised red flags about, the overtime structural deficit anyway. So looking at it further, the day work ambulance, staffing that with overtime might be the best use at this point because it provides more flexible use, more flexible staffing and deployment of that day work ambulance. But for the paramedic chase car, I think the most accurate reflection of the service delivery costs would be adding 5 full-time equivalent positions and for paramedic to staff that vehicle. And I had asked OMB about this and what the cost would be. What would the cost difference be replacing it with 5 FTEs? And they did give me some information on that. I'm trying to pull it up now. And a lot would depend on when services are supposed to start. The way the budget is laid out today with nothing but backfilled overtime, services could technically start July 1st, or I believe the first pay period of FY22. And so that would be the $637,000 with operating costs built in. The personnel costs for that are about $400,000. If you wanted to begin adding 5 FTEs and still keep service beginning right at the beginning of FY22, the cost would be approximately $314,000 more added to the budget in order to maintain that service level of the new paramedic chase car, but also add FTEs to the budget. In the out years, the cost would be about the same as the overtime. It would be about $400,000 a year just to provide that cost. So there's no real savings from moving forward with overtime other than FY22. And at this point, I'm recommending that 5 FTEs be added to staff the paramedic chase car. The next item is the fire and rescue audit. As you remember, this was part of the police and community engagement supplemental appropriation that the county executive proposed last fall. $350,000 was for police and the community engagement effort, and there was $200,000 for fire and rescue, and the joint GO and public safety committee and then full council decided not to approve the $200,000 until the scope of work was finalized and approved for fire and rescue, and then add funding to this FY22 operating budget. So the county executives now included that $200,000, but they've also split the audit into 2 separate studies. One will deal with resource deployment, more specifically workload, overtime, staffing analysis, resource allocation, and what's necessary to enhance operational efficiencies. And then the other one will be specifically for diversity and racial equity assessment of the department, and that will include a climate survey. And they believe by splitting it into 2 audits, into 2 studies, they'll better be able to procure the subject matter experts for each issue and be able to provide much more accurate recommendations when the audit results come back. Fire and Rescue states that they will have the statements of work ready for this solicitation by June 1st, or it's expected by June 1st, and they anticipate award early in FY22. The next item is the Bethesda Chevy Chase Rescue Squad. Again, this has been an issue for several years. Fire and Rescue currently pays for certain LFRD costs, such as commercial insurance, workers' comp, utilities, and fuel, and some other issues. And historically, BCCRS has paid their own way. However, for the past several years, they've requested that the Fire and Rescue budget cover some of these items in a manner similar to what they do for other LFRDs. For FY19, BCCRS had requested a total of $262,000, and the council approved $176,000 of that. That funding level has been included in the base budget for the past couple of years as well. They are again requesting additional support from Fire and Rescue, and again, it's the same type of services provided to other LFRDs. Their letter is on circles 16 and 17. And what they're asking for this year is some funding in the budget, not directly to BCCRS, but funding that helps cover the cost of EMS supplies, such as oxygen masks, splints, defibrillator pads, IV supplies, and cervical collars. And then add the BCCRS's Stryker Power Cotton Load Systems to the county's maintenance contract, and to permit access to the county central maintenance facility for all BCCRS apparatus service and repairs. MCVFRA also sent a letter in support of this. That's included on circles 18 and 19. And as Mr. Katz mentioned earlier, Councilmember Friedson has also provided a letter of support, and his letter is attached on circles 20 to 21. I didn't have an exact cost of what those supplies and service provisions would be. BCCRS had estimated they might be as high as $200,000, and that they had actually spent $55,000 on the EMS supplies and their Stryker Power Cot maintenance contract. but they weren't sure about apparatus service and repairs. I just talked to OMB this morning, and they advised that the total cost for these services and supplies would be $155,000. And at this point, I'm recommending that that amount be added to the fire and rescue budget to provide parity for BCCRS with the other LFRD funding and services. The next item is cell phones. They're maintained on fire and rescue apparatus. This was an issue first when the public safety radio system was discussed and how it had some critical failures. It was past its end of service contract, end of life, and they had tried to procure as many spare parts as possible, but didn't know if they had everything they needed to keep this up and running. And the public safety departments that relied on this radio system were tasked with ensuring that they had appropriate backup systems in place. And so they did that. And one of these items was having cell phones issued on each MCFRS apparatus at the unit officer position, which they did. And it was originally only funded for 6 months in FY21 until the new public safety radio system had cut over and was operational. However, Fire and Rescue used these cell phones for mobile integrated health services, telehealth, and the alternate destination program, which the committee was briefed on in February 2021. Since these pieces are critical to different parts of service delivery for fire and rescue, we're recommending that those remain funded in the budgets moving forward. Just briefly, put information on recruit classes and attrition. They're scheduled to have 2 recruit classes in FY22. One will be previously trained personnel, and that'll have approximately 30 recruits. And then the other class will be a regular class with 50 to 55 recruits. Information on EMST fund, which you had just spoken about with Mr. Drummer. 20 million has been budgeted for this fund, of which about 2.8 million will be distributed to the volunteers. Moving to the CIP amendments, there are a few CIP amendments for you to look at. Most of these are reductions based on actual expenditure reductions or delays in the projects. For the fire station emergency power system upgrade, this is an expenditure reduction of $464,000, and it relates to the old fire station 25, which has been removed from the project since there is no longer an active fire station. The apparatus replacement program, which is never set in stone anyway, that can have some ongoing modifications based on reassessment of needs. The recommended amendment reduces total project funding by $360,000. And that reduction is due to lower than expected costs in previous years. And there are some adjusted expenditures for FY21 and 24 that reflect deferral of scheduled FY21 replacements and the reprioritization of replacements for aerial ladder trucks. Glen Echo Fire Station renovation. This amendment delays funding until FY23 due to project delays. And the same thing for Rockville Fire Station 3. It's delaying funding from 22 to 23 due to project delays. White Flint on page 9, this amendment shows a $3.1 million expenditure increase due to schematic design and cost escalation. Construction on it, however, has been pushed out a year till mid to late 2023 due to fiscal capacity. And then on March 15th, the executive sent over a new amendment for a new project, the Heart Monitor and Defibrillator Replacement Program. And this project provides for the purchase of 27 Stryker LifePak heart monitors and defibrillators assigned to advanced life support transport units, paramedic chase cars, and engines. They have a useful life of 5 to 8 years, and they have to be replaced on a regular basis. And the source of funds for that is short-term financing. And finally, racial equity and social justice considerations. I just briefly spoke about some of the things that the department has been doing, and the fire chief has prioritized this type of work for several years, both through recruiting and community outreach efforts. Several years ago, Fire and Rescue implemented hiring preferences for those who live in the county and those who speak a second language. And it's also worked with MCPS to implement the high school fire science career pathway program, and that's helped with some diverse recruiting efforts as well. Unfortunately, a lot of this has been kind of sidelined by COVID and social distancing restrictions. It's expected that the racial equity and social justice elements of the new audit will help identify the effectiveness of these current efforts and help make recommendations for new ones. I'm also recommending that the committee receive a briefing on these findings once the audit has been completed. And I just wanted to briefly summarize my recommendations for this, adding 5 FTEs to staff the paramedic chase car, and that's approximately a $300,000 increase. adding the $155,000 to help cover BCCRS equipment and maintenance needs, and then following up on several items when that information becomes available, either in the fall or when the audit comes back. And I'm recommending approval of the rest of the budget as submitted by the executive.
Thank you very much, Ms. Frog. As always, you make a very difficult packet sound a whole lot easier than what it really is. Chief Goldstein, very glad to see you here. Did you have anything to add?
So following Susan is very much a pleasure. As you said, she took a very dense and complicated submission, boils it down, gives a good description thereof. And as we've been progressing in the service and with the executive and council support, I will open myself to your questions and discussion topics.
Thank you very much. I did have one item when I was reading about the cell phones that reminded me. Susan, I think it's you someone should be on mute. I think that and you deserved a drink. I mean, hopefully it was water, but you deserved a drink. But we heard the ice rattling there. Chief, a very appreciative citizen called me and said that their elderly parent had been in the nursing home where they were, that they had called a 911 and the ambulance showed up, and the driver called the person who called me to let him know what was going on, which was, they were most appreciative. But on caller ID, when it comes up, it came up not that it was fire and rescue calling them. It came up that it was, I don't know, someplace else or whatever. And as you know, we all get those calls that you don't necessarily answer them, especially on your cell phone, if it doesn't come up on caller ID who it is. So I don't know if that's something we could correct, if it's something that we could do something about, but I did want to mention it in case someone, I mean, she called right back when she realized who had left the message. But if that's something we can do, I think that's something we should look into. But as far as I'm concerned, what is being suggested by staff is certainly something that we should support. And with that, colleagues, please. Council Vice President Albornoz was first this time. I saw his hand up. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. President. I certainly concur with the staff packet recommendations and do appreciate that the county executive, I can say this as well, within our Health and Human Services budget that we're deliberating over as well, has put us in a much better position than in previous years, in large part because of the federal funding we've received, but it is good news. I did want to follow up, Chief Goldstein. I was so impressed with the presentation you all gave several weeks ago on the pilot program for telehealth, redirected to our different primary care facilities and away from emergency rooms. And I apologize, I didn't get a chance to do a deep dive into the packet. Is that in here, Ms. Farag? Has that been annualized or has it been increased at all?
It hasn't been increased to my knowledge, but I can kick that over to OMB.
Well, thank you, Mr. Albornoz.
Okay.
Go ahead, Rachel, if you will.
Oh, I was just going to say, from a budgeting perspective, the major general fund impact of that is the cell phone deployment, which has been worked into the base in this budget.
Vice President Albornoz, as you said, that was very eye-opening, as the things that we have been collectively working on for several years have come together, and with the implementation of the Center for Medicare Studies ET3, Emergency Triage and Transport Program, and being a part of that, incorporating telehealth, doctors available 24 hours a day for video dialogue and video support of the patient in their house with a doctor. That started on January 1st, so we are just wrapping up the first quarter of that. We have continued on with the alternative destination or non-hospital as our receiving facilities, and that's a great expansion of the options at hand. The opportunities for
I hope that doesn't mean there's a fire somewhere or something.
it's not, but there was no caller ID that told me who it was, so I didn't
All right,
answer.
start with
Yeah.
me, Goldstein. Start with me.
Right.
Go ahead. Yeah.
That was Chief Baltrowski trying to give me that example. No. The abilities of working towards nurse practitioner or advanced care providers at the 911 center with Director Cass, that's on the very near horizon as well. And MIH, or the Mobile Integrated Health Partnership between Health and Human Services and Fire Rescue, is at full strength, is engaging to the levels that it was designed to, and will only continue to improve the care to our residents and enabling them to remain in control, remain in place at home, and to be less dependent upon the 911 safety net. So absolutely, thank you for your support. And the team is working very diligently and collaborative on expanding those services.
Thank you, Chief. And I just had one more question. I know last year during the budget, we discussed at length a transition in the program to ensure that the team is reaching out to multicultural recruits so that our units reflect the diversities of the communities we're serving. How's that going? How is that reflected in this budget? And do you feel confident with what you have in these resources, you'll be able to continue those efforts to, in future recruitment classes, work on that diversity?
Work there has to be continuous and, always a part of our activity. We had gotten into a annual cycle of entrance exams in December. We were very fortunate that our entrance exam in 2020 was in February, right before the pandemic hit. And we did not do one at the end of 2020 with the pandemic considerations. We had an open application period that was extended for a week. It just closed on Monday of this week. I believe it was President Hucker outlined the same challenges that public safety law enforcement is seeing, reference recruiting and hiring. We are seeing that yet again. We extended our application for a week to garner more applicants. The number was less than 1,000 in the original 2-week period of open application. Our hope is that number has grown, and as we go to do an online entrance exam this time, which is changing from our past practice of everybody having to be in person, that we will enable more people to be able to take that entrance exam because of changes in technology. We have shifted folks in the department as we dealt with COVID and provided additional capacity to our medical section. But as that is winding down, our recruiter will be back at it in full time, because you have to have the goal, which is your application period and when people will be able to apply, so that you can provide good, timely information when you're out there at an event. And then B, have folks that meet the community's demographics, demonstrating the department's capabilities. So a single person is not the answer, it's a team, and that team needs to be reflective of the community and which group you're outreaching to at that event. So we strive to continue on that, and we will continue to work with that.
Thank you. And my last question is for Ms. Farag. I guess as we continue the transition on 911 technology, is that reflected in this operating budget, or is that a separate line item somewhere else?
No, all of the Emergency Communications Center is under the police department budget, even though it's co-run both by fire and police.
Okay, thank you. Wanted to confirm, because obviously that was a concern raised by this committee previously, and want to make sure we continue down that path. So I'll defer that one when we get there. Thank you all so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Council President, did you have anything?
I think you and the council vice president anticipated my questions. I wanted to know more about the telehealth. I appreciate the update. I think that's very exciting. And anyway, I'm on board.
Very good.
Recommendation.
So I'm assuming that it's without objection that we do the suggestions by Ms. Farag on the two points. Is that
Can I
correct?
just
Yeah, go ahead.
clarify one thing for you, Mr. Katz? I forgot to mention, this year we're doing recommendations for adds to the budget a little bit differently, putting them in categories 1 through 3 based on funding and revenues.
Yes.
And I wanted to recommend these under category 3 as critical adds to the fire department budget, but I will work with other council central staff and try to figure out offsetting savings elsewhere to make sure that it's more budget neutral. And I just wanted to, okay.
And I think we sincerely appreciate that as well. So it's without objection. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
The next item that we're going to be discussing is the Sheriff's Department, and I'm very glad to see that the sheriff has joined us. We're bringing his budget up from the consent items because of Ms. Farag's suggestion. And so, Ms. Farag, would you like to tell everyone of your suggestion, please?
Sure. I'm not recommending any changes in the sheriff's budget other than a discussion on the taser item. So I'd like to limit discussion to the taser item today. There is a proposed reduction of about $18,000, which would delay the purchase of new tasers for deputy sheriffs until FY23. The sheriff purchases tasers under the county police contract with Axon, and those tasers have to be replaced every 5 years. It's also my understanding that the sheriff would like to ensure that all deputies are eventually trained and certified to carry tasers. They currently have about 54 certified deputies, and the sheriff has been training about 15 deputies per year. I'm concerned with police reform issues abounding and use of force concerns, particularly deadly use of force, that law enforcement officers in the county should have every available tool to them that is a less lethal use of force tool. And I think that delaying this for the sheriff might be counter to that type of police reform issue as far as, trying to help with less lethal uses of force to deliver law enforcement services to the community in the safest way that we possibly can. So I was hoping that the committee could take this under consideration, and if the sheriff could explain a little bit about the TASER program. And as you know, the sheriff, they have unique services, unique duties that can put them into dangerous situations quite often, particularly with potentially, dangerous issues serving like extreme risk protective orders, for example. So I just was hoping that the sheriff could explain a little bit about the TASER program and the need for tasers before moving forward.
Thank you very much, Sheriff. Good to see you. Would you like to explain it, please?
Sure. Well, first of all, Chairman Katz, President Hucker, Vice President Albornoz, thank you for pulling me off the consent counter so I could say hello to you during our budget process, first of all. Second of all, I appreciate all the work that Susan and Taman did with the sheriff's budget. I do appreciate the discussion having to do with any sort of less lethal option. During these times where police reform is utmost in our community, we have been working very closely with the county executive as well as Mr. Wren from McGeo, President McGeo, trying to get to a point where all of the deputy sheriffs have this less lethal tool of a taser. We have been working very hard. We're at about 74 tasers in our agency right now, which is about halfway there to all the deputy sheriffs being able to get them. This would put our process back a little bit, having to wait a year. I do understand that, the sheriff's office budget is so lean that we just do not have many areas to cut for cost savings plans. So, this was a small amount of money in the big picture, but it does have some impacts on going an entire year with not being able to having the opportunity to purchase what would be an additional 11 tasers out of the little over $17,000. During this last year, even though COVID, we have seen almost 500 court-ordered emergency evaluation petitions. And Chairman Katz, as you know, you and I have spoken considerably about the mental health aspects of public safety, and one of the things that is so incredibly important is have these sort of less lethal tools to engage people that are having mental health crisis. So that's kind of the overall topic right now. I will certainly defer to your expertise. I know that it has competing priorities in the entire budget, but that would be the explanation and of why it would be beneficial to continue this process of equipping the deputies with tasers.
Thank you, Sheriff, and I appreciate that explanation as well. I believe that this is the right thing to do. I think that and I guess, Ms. Frog, you're going to have to figure out, and my colleagues are going to jump in on this, but you would have to figure out where this would be on the tiers and all of that sort of thing. But I do believe we would be doing the correct thing by adding these funds. Council President or Vice President, do you have anything to Council President?
I fully agree with you, Mr. Chairman. I'm for less lethal approaches and our sheriffs having more options. It is consistent with what we just did on the use of force bill, and I'm supportive of the recommendation.
Thank you. Council Vice President.
Thank you. I agree. And obviously, with the looming challenges before us with evictions and a number of other areas that the sheriff's office is going to be facilitating, all the more reason, we can provide as many resources as we can and as appropriate as we can. So I concur.
And not to in any way, I mean, they deal with so many different situations, whether it be domestic violence or courtroom security. I mean, everything we are concerned about, obviously they deal with and do a very, very good job. So, Sheriff, we thank you and everyone in your department for everything that you do as well. So I believe that's without objection, Ms. Frog, and now you get to figure out how we deal with it.
I'd put that in category 3 as well, and I'll work with other central staff to find a corresponding offset in savings.
Thank you, Sheriff. It's always good seeing you. Thank you.
Always good seeing all of you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And with that, we're going to now go to the consent items. And Ms. Frog, you please explain to me what's the best way to go forward. I'm assuming we need to also talk about the rest of the sheriff's budget, and then, at least mention it, and then go through each one.
I wasn't going to do that, but I'm happy to do it if the committee wants me to. My understanding was once these are on consent, unless there was a specific issue to discuss, that you would just vote on them and bang, as a whole. So just like on the council agenda when you do it.
So
if there's something that you correct,
yeah.
Yes.
Mr. President or Mr. Vice President, are you comfortable doing it that way?
It's fine with me, and it's what we just did in T&E last week.
Okay. And
good with me too.
Very good. So we're going to, I guess, without objection, vote on the following departments: Sheriff, Circuit Court, State's Attorney, Correction and Rehabilitation, Animal Services, Alcohol Beverage Services, Office of Consumer Protection, and NDA Prisoner Service. If that's without objection, Ms. Farag, are you okay on that?
Yes.
And with that, is there anything else to come before us today?
No, I don't think so.
Very good. Well, thank you all very much. We are adjourned. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.